will come to order. The hearing's in a hybrid format. Our witness, Administrator Fernandez, is in person. Members have the option, as always, to appear virtually or in person. The Senator from Nevada, welcome, along with Ranking Member Toomey. Last Thursday, I invited our witness, FTA Administrator Nuria Fernandez, to Columbus to see the excitement in the community as they plan to build one of the best bus rapid transit networks in the country. Columbus is growing. If we pass the CHIPS Act with Intel's investment in semiconductor production in Central Ohio, it will grow even faster. Investments from the infrastructure bill will help Central Ohio prepare for more people, expand service, connect more Ohioans with these exciting job opportunities with new bus rapid transit. We visited the Banking Commission. We visited the West Broad Street. I know that, I've been on that street. I used to live a half a mile from there. We visited the West Broad Street corridor with CODA's CEO, Joanna Pinkerton. We saw the tremendous opportunity for fast bus service to downtown Columbus that will spur even more development, even new affordable housing along the route. Columbus is not alone. Cleveland RTA has entered the Capital Investment Grants Program for a new BRT route. Cincinnati is planning its own large BRT network. Nearby communities, Pittsburgh and Senator Toomey's state and Indianapolis, also have major BRT investments moving forward with FTA support. For too long, the United States hasn't invested in public transit the way that we should. We've fallen far behind the rest of the world in new transit technology. But with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're finally working to catch up. The bipartisan infrastructure law included the largest investment ever in public transit. It's not just, though, about the numbers. It's about what that investment will do, how this will matter in Ohioans' lives and for people across the country. It will connect more communities. It will mean faster service to more neighborhoods. It will open up new job opportunities so workers aren't limited by a bus that doesn't reach a job site or, as we've seen in this committee, the testimony, doesn't run on Sunday. Right now, families are continuing to feel the pain of high gas prices because of Russia's attack on Ukraine. But if there's a reliable bus or a train nearby, workers simply don't have to choose between paying for gas or making rent. It will make a difference, especially in so many communities that haven't had reliable transit. It's Black and brown communities who have been redlined, who have been cut off from jobs by interstates that walled off their neighborhoods. It's rural areas where walking isn't an option. It's smaller cities and towns that haven't been able to afford big, extensive transit networks like big cities. I grew up in one of those small cities. Alongside these opportunities, we know the transit industry faces challenges. High fuel prices hurt diesel bus operations, and like the private sector, transit agencies compete for qualified workers. We're lucky to have an exceptional leader at FTA working to navigate these challenges and deliver on the promises in the infrastructure bill. That's certainly where Ms. Fernandez comes forward. She's been on this job since last June. She's the first Senate-confirmed woman of color and first Afro-Latina to lead FTA. She and her team have worked to deliver pandemic relief funding efficiently and quickly. In the wake of the pandemic, workers are still adjusting their commutes. We need to preserve transit routes and help transit agencies keep their highly skilled workers on the job. Administrator Fernandez is now focused on an even larger endeavor, implementing the most consequential investment in our transit infrastructure in a generation. FTA's moved quickly to help more communities get new state-of-the-art zero-emission buses on the road. It's important in our fight against climate change. It's going to clean up the air in our communities. It's going to mean new modern buses for Americans to ride. FTA's made it easier for agencies to apply by combining the low-no bus application with the traditional bus program. FTA's worked to get funding for transit construction out the door under the Capital Investment Grants Program and to help our rural communities improve their options. As long as I chair this committee, workers will always have a seat at the table. The administrator has maintained that same commitment. Thank you, Ms. Fernandez, for giving transit workers a strong voice at FTA. She's working to ensure workers have the training needed for the next generation of service. Finally, FTA has continued its sharp focus on safety. On this committee, we've always strongly bipartisanly supported safety efforts. I've worked with Ranking Member Toomey. I worked with Chairman Crapo on safety issues, including in the infrastructure bill. Administrator Fernandez, I look forward to your testimony. Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Fernandez, welcome. Today we'll hear directly from the FTA on implementation of last year's infrastructure law. As I've stated before, we shouldn't pay for an infrastructure package by borrowing billions more dollars, but that's precisely what happened with this law. It authorized so much new spending that $118 billion had to be transferred from the Treasury's general fund to the Highway Trust Fund, which is a specific account financed with federal gas tax revenue to cover mass transit and highway construction costs. President Biden would make this shortfall worse by suspending the federal gas tax for 3 months, reasoning that the solution to high gas prices isn't more supply, but rather more debt. I'd suggest if we want to help commuters and families suffering from inflation, we could start by reversing the administration's actions that keep us from using America's own fossil energy. But back to infrastructure. Federal spending certainly should be driven by a reasoned assessment of our nation's needs. However, last year's infrastructure law seems in many ways to have been driven more by Democratic political imperatives. The bill funneled billions to projects that the private sector has been more than willing to fund, such as ferries and electric vehicle charging stations. Transit was given $108.1 billion over a 5-year period. Now, to put that number into perspective, it's almost twice what transit got in the last surface transportation reauthorization. And this staggering sum is on top of the nearly $85 billion given to transit during just 1 year of the COVID pandemic. The vast majority of that money characterized as emergency spending to offset COVID losses. In fact, that nearly $85 billion exceeded the combined annual operating and capital costs of all transit agencies in the United States of America combined. And at the time, Democrats tried to justify paying for more than 100% of transit agency budgets by saying that transit systems would collapse from declines in ridership and a collapse in state and local tax revenues. Except that state and local tax collection set an all-time new record in 2020, which was then exceeded in 2021. And on top of this all-time record tax revenue collected by state and local governments, Congress gave states more than $850 billion to deal with COVID relief issues. Worse still, billions of dollars will go to transit agencies that were facing systemic ridership declines well before COVID. Since reaching a high of 10.7 billion trips in 2014, transit ridership has steadily fallen. It fell by almost 8% in 2019 alone, before COVID. And the last 2 years saw much steeper declines. Ridership fell at some agencies by over 70%. According to FTA, ridership now is only about 60% of pre-pandemic levels. Some estimates predict ridership will never fully return to pre-pandemic levels. Agency leaders in New York, Pittsburgh, Washington have all said many of their riders simply won't return. And even transit agencies that are predicting ridership to return to pre-pandemic levels don't expect that to happen this decade. So why give away still more taxpayer money to agencies serving far fewer riders? Well, shockingly, the FTA is allowing transit agencies that are seeking federal funding for projects to expand transit systems to use pre-pandemic ridership data from 2019. Transit agencies' largest source for expansion projects is FTA's Capital Investment Grants Program, known as CIG. Now, there are transit agencies seeking millions and even billions of federal taxpayer funding for CIG projects to expand streetcars, commuter rail, light rail, bus rapid transit. And to justify their funding request, FTA has been allowing these transit agencies to use pre-pandemic data on ridership from 2019 and 2020. This boggles the mind. Transit ridership was already in decline pre-COVID, and transit agencies are publicly admitting that their ridership will not recover to pre-pandemic levels for over a decade, if ever. So federal taxpayers will build out transit system expansions to serve ghost riders, which of course will also have the effect of increasing long-term maintenance backlogs. I have no doubt that a few years after these projects are completed, transit agencies will come back to Congress pleading for still more subsidies to operate systems that have become far too large for the demand. Also concerning is FTA's willful disregard of an important feature of last year's infrastructure law. The law requires agencies to make progress on their deferred maintenance backlogs in order to qualify for CIG grants. But FTA allows or plans to allow agencies to qualify for CIG grants even when they are actually falling further behind on their overall deferred maintenance targets. That's no way to protect taxpayers nor to follow the law. And speaking of protecting taxpayers, people should feel safe while using transit. As I stated at our last transit hearing, the rising rates of crime on transit systems are deeply disturbing. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that FDA is taking this issue nearly seriously enough. Let me conclude with this observation. I understand it is certainly not entirely transit agencies' fault that some people are choosing not to use their services. But that doesn't mean that Congress should be throwing even more billions of federal taxpayer dollars at them to build out more services for riders they don't have. I look forward to discussing the future of mass transit today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes Administrator Fernandez. Welcome back to our committee. Thank you for your service.
Chairman, and good morning. Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Toomey, and members of the committee. It is really a pleasure to testify today on the progress that the Federal Transit Administration has made in implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. First, I want to express my gratitude to this committee for advancing my nomination as administrator of the FTA. It is really a privilege of a lifetime to lead FTA during such a critical time for public transit. So just over a year ago, COVID-19 was still ravaging transit systems nationwide, impacting every aspect of the industry. And we greatly appreciate Congress providing about $70 billion in relief funding for communities nationwide in response to this crisis. These funds made certain that Americans had the lifeline they needed and were essential to our economy, preserving hundreds and thousands of jobs at transit agencies and along the extensive supply chain that manufactures and maintains transit vehicles, facilities, and more. Transit helped keep America open. Now, ridership is about 60% of pre-pandemic levels, and it's climbing every day. Recognizing the importance of transit to so many communities, Congress has entrusted FTA with up to $108 billion in funding over the next 5 years, and we do not take that responsibility lightly. Today, I will highlight FTA's progress in delivering on the promise of the bipartisan infrastructure law and our plans for the future. On safety, Secretary Buttigieg has said safety is our North Star, and every transit rider deserves a safe, secure, and reliable trip. And every transit worker must be able to conduct their duties without fear of assault or injury. And we're doing everything in our power to improve safety throughout the industry. Many transit agencies are now required by law to establish safety committees with equal representation of management and frontline workers, and we expect those to be in place by July 31st. Then, by the end of the year, all agencies in urbanized areas must update their agency safety plans to comply with the BIL requirements, including approval by the Safety Committee, if applicable. We are also expanding our data collection regarding assaults and transit workers. These actions will give FTA more information than ever before on the scale of transit safety needs and more resources to address those needs. On workforce development, worker safety is of particular concern. So protecting and expanding the transit workforce is a top priority of FTA. They just don't need safety throughout, but also transit workers need help. They need more co-workers and more apprentices. Thanks to the dedicated funding from Congress, FTA established a Transit Workforce Center last September. The center has already reached thousands of people and several hundred transit agencies with targeted technical assistance to help recruit, train, and upskill their workforce. On funding, another critical aspect to ensuring the safety of our transit systems is to improve the state of good repair of transit assets, from rails in New York to wheels in Cincinnati. And that's why FTA acted swiftly to make over $13 billion in fiscal year 22 formula funding available shortly after the 2022 Appropriations Act unlocked that funding. We're delivering the remaining 2022 funding as quickly as possible, with notices of funding opportunity already issued for 7 out of our 10 competitive programs. And this summer, we anticipate NOFOs for the other competitive programs. On equity and accessibility, regarding the all station accessible plan, I want to thank the committee and Congress for providing the resources to start making headway in the backlog of nearly 900 transit rail systems that remain inaccessible 32 years after the passage of the ADA. Our focus on equity is not only with big cities, though, far from it. FDA has supported transit in rural and tribal areas for decades. It is precisely in those areas where transit can make all the differences for a senior citizen aging in place or a veteran who needs care at the VA. In closing, going forward, the transit industry will adapt to meet the changing needs of our nation. But I want to take this opportunity to reiterate that despite the challenges of the pandemic, the core value of transit is unchanged. Over the next 5 years and beyond, all of us at the FTA are excited to continue working with this committee and all the communities in your states and across the nation who rely on transit to invest the historic funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law effectively and equitably. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Administrator Fernandez. Thank you for coming to Columbus last week and visiting the West Broad Street corridor. I know we'll see additional requests for BRT funding from a number of Ohio communities in the coming years. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided $8 billion in advance appropriations for the CIG program, including significant funding for these BRT projects under the small starts category, as you know. We do an 80% federal share for highway projects, yet the federal government rarely contributes that much for transit projects. Should FDA give a greater federal share on CIG projects where the law allows?
Mr. Chairman, under the leadership of and this committee and the work of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was an increase of up to $23 billion in the funding for transit capital investment over the next 5 years. So that is a doubling. And with the sustained investment in the revisions to the small starts eligibility, the past year alone, we have seen a 150% increase in the pipeline of projects, of small starts project entering the CIG together with the new starts projects, core capacity, and expedited project delivery. Half of the current projects in the CIG are for small starts. So I have heard from the project sponsors, especially from smaller and mid-sized cities, that local match can present a problem. And we are working very closely with them as the applications become available and are complete to assist them with identifying not only what their needs are from a financial perspective, but what the amount of federal funds that will be available and we can make available to them.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony, you stated this summer the FTA will be initiating the major competitive programs established by the new infrastructure law, the All Stations Accessibility Program, and the Rail Vehicle Replacement Program. Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority has made significant progress in making its rail stations accessible to riders with disabilities, but the agency has 17 remaining stops and stations that are not ADA compliant. These investments are long overdue. The Cleveland RTA has another very pressing problem, the replacement of its problem and project, the replacement of its entire rail car fleet. Agencies like Cleveland and Philadelphia and the ranking member's the largest city in his state have rail cars that date back to the Carter and Reagan administrations. That means many rail cars are in excess of 40 years old. Is it possible for FTA to have awards out for these programs later this calendar year?
Mr. Chairman, as a matter of fact, we are going to be issuing a notice of funding opportunity for the All Stations Accessibility Program this summer and hope to have selections announced by the end of this year. Regarding the Rail Vehicle Replacement Program, as you noted, lots of the transit agencies, particularly the legacy agencies, have vehicles that have exceeded their useful life, and that affects the timely delivery of service and also impacts schedule. We will be issuing a notice of funding opportunity for that program this fall and hope to have make the selection announcements early next year.
Okay, thank you. My last question. I've heard from two agencies in Ohio, SARTA in Cincinnati, Southwest Ohio Regional Transit, and Akron Metro, that they're having issues on proposed projects. FTA over the years has created more than one type of categorical exclusion under NEPA. I'm a strong supporter of the environment. I know you are, but a categorical exclusion should be simple and easy to apply for, particularly for transit projects that almost by definition help the environment. These agencies face challenges with the Uniform Relocation Act and appraisal requirements. These issues are more challenging, pretty obviously, for small and medium-sized agencies. Thank you for looking at these issues. Can FDA please continue working to find solutions to help these agencies and any other projects that face similar challenges?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we certainly can and have made ourselves available through our regional offices to work very closely with grantees as they are considering building new systems, extending existing systems, and going through the NEPA process. We also offer free courses through the National Transit Institute. But as you stated, there are a lot of challenges, particularly for the small operators, and we will continue through our regional offices to provide that service and make ourselves available to guide them as they're going through the process.
Thank you. I said my last question, but I'll ask another since your answers are shorter than most witnesses. When we were on the bus last Thursday in Columbus, we talked about how agencies are approaching the use of battery electric and hydrogen-powered buses. As we discussed, the city of Canton, Ohio, is the nation's leader in hydrogen buses. What are you hearing from the industry, and how is FTA helping agencies consider both those technologies?
It's exciting to hear that the industry overall is making transitions. A lot of them have already preemptively taken advantage of formula dollars to start transitioning their fleets. And in the bipartisan infrastructure law, as you may know, Mr. Chairman, the increase in funding is also going to make available specific percentages, 25%, for low emission vehicles. And we're seeing from members of the industry that they are pursuing the type of technology that's going to reduce greenhouse gas, but the type of technology that can better address their needs in the locations that they are.
Thank you, Senator Toomey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator Fernandez, welcome. And just for the record, the Chairman's observation that your answers tend to be shorter than those of most witnesses is a very high compliment here in the Senate. In your written testimony, you highlight that Secretary Buttigieg has said that safety is DOT's North Star. But despite having far fewer riders, New York, LA, Chicago, and Philadelphia, among others, are all seeing spikes in transit crime. Even New York City's mayor, a former cop, said he doesn't feel safe on the subway. Now, you mentioned that every transit rider deserves a safe, secure, and reliable trip. Transit agencies have, as I mentioned during my opening comments, received staggering, extraordinary amounts of federal taxpayer funding recently, including funding that can be used for security and to combat crime. So my question is, so how much of all of this money that we have recently delivered to transit agencies is actually being used to reduce the spike in crime that's occurring on our transit systems?
Senator Toomey, every transit agency is committed to safety, as is the U.S. Department of Transportation. And what we're experiencing, what transit agencies are experiencing in this time, is a result of many factors. Given the pandemic, the effect that has had on on loss of life and livelihood. We've seen an increase.
I understand. I've got limited time. I understand there are many factors contributing, but my question is, how much of the resources, the huge amount of new resources we've provided, is being used to address this spike in crime?
The transit agencies have access to their formula dollars, and those dollars increased by 30%, and they are applying those dollars towards all of their programs, including safety. They're required. If you're looking for a specific, I'd be happy to provide you with a specific number. I don't have a number in front of me.
I would appreciate it if you would. I'd like to know, first of all, that the FTA is in fact tracking the amount of money that's being spent to make our dangerous subway systems less dangerous, and how much that is. But it's also my understanding that in most cities, fare evasion is a crime. And experience has shown that cracking down on fare evasion reduces the incidence of criminal activity in the subway systems. Does FTA collect data on fare evasion?
The National Transit Database does not collect information on fare evasion. It does collect the information on how much of the fare ratio of the collection of fares. I'm sorry, not the collection of fares, but what the operating budget for each of the agencies, what it constitutes, how much is generated by fares and how much is generated by other countries.
But you acknowledge that there is a high correlation between fare evasion and criminal activity on subway systems.
there is a correlation between many factors that affect
Yeah, but
criminal
this is an
activity.
obvious one. People are choosing not to pay their fare. They are breaking the law. And then, not shockingly, some of them go on to break other laws because they are, after all, lawbreakers. I just think that fare evasion is an important violation of the law that the FDA should be tracking. But you don't track it.
Senator Toomey, we do not track fare evasion. Transit agencies, as you may know, some of them have open fare, others have fare gates. So they all collect their fares in a very different manner. And the information that is provided to us really has to do with the resources, the sources of funds that build their budgets.
Okay. Let's go on to the topic of the capital investment grants. Last year's infrastructure law requires that transit agencies make progress on their deferred maintenance of their transit systems in order to be eligible to receive a CIG grant. And the idea, obviously, is help protect federal taxpayers and ensure that CIG funds are not being spent on large capital projects for transit agencies who aren't even properly maintaining their existing systems. My concern is that the new interim guidance that the FDA has put out really makes a mockery of this requirement from the statute. As you know, there are 4 categories of assets on which there are deferred maintenance backlogs: rolling stock, equipment, facilities, and infrastructure. Your interim guidance allows a transit agency to make no progress whatsoever, in fact, could go backwards on 3 out of the 4. And then on the 4th, which is rolling stock, there are 26 different types of rolling stock assets, and under your interim guidance, an agency can be losing ground on deferred maintenance on 25 of the 26, if they had that many. As long as they're making some progress on one of them, then that's deemed to qualify them for this progress requirement. This does not seem like a faithful implementation of the law. So could you explain what is the justification for ignoring 75% of the categories of assets when they actually account for a very large portion of deferred maintenance?
Senator Toomey, first of all, thank you for, and this committee and the Congress for including that requirement in the bipartisan infrastructure law. I think it's very important all transit agencies have, in fact, a process for identifying the state of their the state of their assets, the life cycle of those assets, and when they need to be replaced. The additional requirement of a transit asset management and tying that requirement to the capital investment grant approvals is we put out guidance for that early this spring and received public comments. We've taken those comments, and in particularly the ones regarding the targets and how to, we'll be publishing a final implementation in the very near future that's more specific. Right now, we continue to evaluate the various categories of the assets and how they are being monitored or they are being rated through their condition. And one of the things that we do know is that transit agencies, when they are applying for a capital investment grant program, we do a thorough review of their budgets, we do a thorough review of their capital programs, we do a thorough review of their ability to continue operating the systems that they have.
Well, I'm out of time, but I just want to point out that it's impossible for me to understand how it is a faithful implementation of the law to systematically exclude the vast majority of deferred maintenance categories. And I know that it is an interim guidance. I'm certainly hoping that the final guidance will address a much more comprehensive category of deferred maintenance as is intended by the statute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Senator Menendez of New Jersey is recognized.
Administrator Fernandez, welcome. You and I have had multiple conversations about the Gateway program in the past. Broadly, Gateway aims to modernize the rail infrastructure along a 10-mile segment of the Northeast Corridor connecting New Jersey to New York Penn Station. This is a critical stretch of track that carries over 200,000 daily Amtrak and New Jersey Transit passenger trips on approximately 450 trains and is the linchpin of the entire Northeast Corridor, a region that accounts for over 20% of GDP of the nation. The Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Programs Grants Program is the primary federal lending source for Phase 1 of the Gateway Program, which includes building a new Portal North Bridge, which ultimately is critical for going from Boston all the way to Washington, and new rail tunnels under the Hudson River. The existing century-old tunnels were badly damaged by Superstorm Sandy and in dire need of replacement. Now, I appreciate the Biden administration's continued support for the Portal North Bridge project, which has already signed a full funding agreement with FTA, and the work that has been done to move the Hudson River Tunnel project towards an FFGA as well. The FTA's annual funding recommendations report released with the President's FY23 budget recommends for the first time that the Hudson River Tunnel project receive $100 million in SIG funding in FY23. So, Administrator, can you speak for a moment about the importance of the Hudson River Tunnel projects and what went into the determination that it should receive funding in FY23?
Yes, Senator Menendez. Last fall, the Hudson Tunnel project partners made some significant improvements by finalizing their first step, which was the financial plan, and by updating that, we were able to then rate the project a medium high under the SIG program. And this rating is what resulted in the recommendation in the President's budget for fiscal year 23 for the funds that you noted. This project is a project of regional significance, and it is currently in the project development phase. There are still several steps that need to be achieved in order for it to be considered for a full funding grant agreement. But nonetheless, just last week, the project partners, the state of New York, New Jersey, and the Port Authority signed a memorandum of understanding with the Gateway Development Commission, which in fact outlines the payments that they're going to be contributing towards the Portal North Bridge project, in addition to the Hudson Tunnel. And that is a good step in the right direction. They've also hired an executive director at the Gateway Development Commission, and that will then set the stage to stand up the entity that will become the designated recipient for federal funds to deliver that project.
Now, they've made significant progress. Does the Hudson River Tunnel project remain on track to eventually receive FY23 funding?
There are several other steps following the project development where they currently are. They need to then enter into engineering, and it's at that stage that the federal government will lock in the federal contribution to the project.
Okay. Now, you said it was a project of regional significance. It certainly is. I would say it's a project of national significance. When you have 20% of the entire nation's GDP generated by the region, and this is a linchpin to mobility for businesses to get workers to work and for people to go to hospitals and a whole host of other things, I think it's a project of national significance. Now, I understand, I heard Senator Toomey question the need for strong federal support for transit due to lower ridership during the pandemic. The Regional Planning Association recently released a report that confirms the continued need for the Gateway project and found that Trans-Hudson ridership would return to or exceed pre-pandemic levels by the time the new Hudson River tunnels are built, and would exceed pre-pandemic levels by 15 to 32% by 2050. So yes, our transit agencies, like other industries, were hard hit by the pandemic, but the fact remains that transit will remain a vital and growing part of our transportation mix. And I'm proud of the much-needed investments that the bipartisan infrastructure law makes in modernizing our transit systems. Let me turn to one other subject. I've long been an advocate of transit-oriented development because I've seen the transformative effect that it can have on communities, going back to my time as mayor in Union City. When properly planned and executed, it can bring significant new investment to communities, providing new economic opportunities for families and business owners while ensuring affordable housing for residents. The bipartisan infrastructure bill expanded a pilot program that I helped create several years ago, and I appreciate the FTA announced the availability of $13 million for the program for FY22. Do you believe that further strengthening the linkages between transit, affordable housing, and economic development can help to create more livable, walkable, sustainable communities?
Yes, I do, Senator Menendez. As a matter of fact, public transportation is about people. And the models that are used to determine where public transportation should provide service are models that are driven by origin and destination. So housing, affordable housing to keep individuals close to high-capacity transit centers with high-quality transit service is definitely a need. And the transit-oriented development, which encourages the public-private partnership through joint development as well, would see investments along corridors where transit currently exists, and also create that density that is necessary, that infilling that is necessary to support the continued growth of communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service.
Thanks. Senator Cortez Masto of Nevada is recognized.
Thank you. And Administrator Fernandez, thank you for being here as well. Let me follow up on what my friend and colleague, Senator Menendez, was talking about when it comes to this nexus between transit and housing. Just recently, I sent a letter to DOT and FTA about implementing my Better Plan Act, which passed in the infrastructure bill. And what the legislation really does, it requires more consideration of housing in transportation planning and establishes a voluntary housing coordination process that MPOs and local governments can undertake to align transportation investments with increased housing supply. I guess my first question to you is, can you confirm that the department is working on a response to my letter and the implementation of my legislation within the bipartisan infrastructure package?
Yes, we are, Senator Cortez Masto. As a matter of fact, we're currently working with our partners at the U.S. Department of Transportation to implement the housing coordination plan provision. It was also that's going to help metropolitan planning organizations put more emphasis on regional goals for integrating housing, and specifically affordable housing transportation, into their economic plans. We also have a working group with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, all geared towards our Thriving Communities effort. And that interagency group is going to be focusing primarily on the housing, that intersection of housing and transportation, to help advance the needs of what we have already deemed is one of the highest cost to a household. Transportation is, followed by housing. And if we can keep affordable transportation and affordable housing in the same corridors, I think that would help save a lot of dollars in taxpayers' wallets.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to highlight the aspects of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that do truly involve climate change, and it really is a climate bill. And we provided over $5.5 billion in emission reduction transit investments for buses in this country, for which I can say is vital given the environmental concerns we're tackling in Nevada, from wildfires to severe drought. And that's not even counting the billions for cleaner school buses. And the change I made or was able to get to provide EV charging eligibility through transit formula dollars. I have seen firsthand the amazing impact that this money has made in my state. Was just recently in Reno, Washoe County, with the Regional Transportation Commission. They have a fleet of over 70 buses. We waved goodbye to the last diesel fuel bus there, and what they have implemented, and we were celebrating, was the complete retirement of their dirtier buses. And they are 13 years ahead of schedule. And that's a benefit, not just to that community, but to the many families that live and breathe the air within that community as well. And so as you're implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law, what do you see as the future prospects of sufficient and expanding domestic manufacturing of cleaner transportation technology, such as electric buses and the batteries powering them?
Yeah. Senator, there has been some challenges with the implementation and then the availability. But what we're seeing is that manufacturing has stepped up. There's going to be an increase in the number of manufacturers that are going to be helping deliver electric vehicles, electric charging stations, in addition to building up on that supply chain. We have a long-term goal, and that long-term goal is to transition all buses, all public transportation buses, to a cleaner, greener technology. And the funding that was made available through the bipartisan infrastructure law, specifically for the bus and low and no emissions, in addition to the formula dollars available to transit agencies, is going to help us get there. So we are highly encouraged. Yes, there's been some supply chain challenges, but we see those as short term. But in the long term, the plan is that transit agencies, like the ones you have referenced, that have really stepped up and develop plans. And we're also helping those who have not developed a plan to create a transition plan for their fleets.
Thank you. And then finally, talk a little bit about workforce measures, because you started that conversation, or you touched on it in your comments. Are we building the necessary pipeline we need around workforce and bringing the workforce along with us as part of this bipartisan infrastructure package to create these opportunities in this new innovation economy that we're seeing?
Yeah, we're certainly targeting that because we recognize that really the workforce is the one that's going to make the significant difference in not only delivering service, but maintaining. And then we also have the manufacturing side of our industry that needs to be able to generate the assets that are used for ferries, trolleys, buses, and trains. The Federal Transit Administration last year I created the Transit Workforce Center in recognition that the transit industry is experiencing what is known as the silver tsunami, and we have such a large percentage of transit workers that could retire in the next 5 years. Recognizing that we still need to continue providing service, and that service is now going to take us into communities where we're going to be closing transit deserts, and we're going to be trying to access and provide a higher quality service. The Transit Workforce Center will be focusing on the recruitment, training, and retention, in addition to upskilling with the transition from combustion emissions engines to the electric, and also on apprenticeships, creating apprenticeship programs and working very closely, identifying opportunities with local community colleges and Job Corps and others to start building that pipeline, because we have to build it and we have to build it quick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Smith of Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Fernandez, it's so good to see you again. It was almost exactly a year ago, I think, that you came to Minnesota for the field hearing for the Housing Transit Subcommittee. Mr. Chair, we had a really terrific field hearing talking about transit issues in Minnesota, and I greatly appreciated you taking the time to come and talk with our local leaders and community leaders about our transit needs. So thank you so much for that again. I want to actually follow up on something that my good friend and colleague from Nevada was just talking about. The bipartisan infrastructure law has already put millions of dollars into transit systems around the country for building new lines, replacing buses, and improving transit infrastructure. And these dollars are supporting transit agencies that are pursuing clean energy through low or no emissions vehicles. This is an issue close to my heart because companies like New Flyer in Minnesota are working very hard to meet this increasing demand for zero emissions buses. But like all bus manufacturers, there's a shortage of microchips, which is making it hard to fill orders in a timely way. This is something that I've been hearing about from Minnesota transit agencies in advance of the subcommittee hearing we had on this issue earlier this year. So we have heard a lot of talk here in Washington about the impacts of the chip shortage on the car market, but I think it's important to pay attention to its impact on transit also. So can you talk to me a little bit about this, Administrator Fernandez? Is the FTA focusing on this? What is the impact of the chip shortage on our capacity to implement the bipartisan infrastructure law? And then just as a follow-up, seems to me, Mr. Chair, that if we could enact USICA, the competitiveness bill, this would be another benefit of that for transit in the United States as well. But could you just talk to this chip shortage and its impact on transit?
Yes, and Senator, I'm so glad you referenced the field hearing, because it was really my distinct pleasure to join you there and talk about the great things that are happening in your state as well. As we have all noted, the supply chain for manufacturing, particularly around the metals and minerals needed for this transition to zero emission, has been one that has been highlighted. And we are, DOT continues to be one of the lead agencies on the White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. I I am very encouraged by the progress that has been made, and as I stated earlier, the focus on how we get our systems operational, get the tools, get the materials and the equipment that is necessary, the components that is necessary, is something that is of high attention, has garnered high attention at the DOT. The American manufacturers are all stepping up. As I noted, there's about 80 billion in planned investments in semiconductor manufacturing and more than 100 billion in announced investments in the electric vehicles. So those will help keep pace. Once those investments continue to be made, will keep pace with the applications that transit agencies are submitting. We just we issued the notice of funding opportunity for our bus facilities. It was a combined NOFO that also included the low and no emission vehicle procurement, and that closed in May, the end of May, and we will be announcing the selections of those. That means that we will have hundreds of new buses that are going to be manufactured, and the industry is stepping up to meet that challenge.
That's fantastic. We want these buses manufactured in the United States, and the more that we can have the components for these buses, including microchips, also manufactured in the United States, I think we're going to be much better off, and I think it goes to the importance of passing USICA. Just a couple seconds that I have left, I want to ask you about something related to equity. Now, transit, we know, is a vital tool for advancing equity in disadvantaged communities. It is the way in which people get to their jobs, to their educations, they get their groceries, they get their health care. But we also know that transit can be harmful to communities that are displaced as a construction happens, that there is displacement of economic and cultural corridors, and it can be very hard on small businesses. I'm really proud of the work that the Met Council in Minnesota and Hennepin County have done on the Bottineau extension in Minnesota, which is they've created an anti-displacement work group that is organized to mitigate the issues of displacement as transit is being constructed. I think that bringing this kind of equity lens to transit is really important. I want to just appreciate, and I appreciated our conversations about this when you were in Minnesota. Could you just address this briefly, Administrator Fernandez? What is the FTA doing to think about expanding access to contracts, for example, and addressing the direct needs that we have around small and minority-owned businesses impacted by transit and creating opportunities for them?
Yes, and thank you for that question, because as you may know, equity is one of the highest priority considerations. We want to make sure that transit in itself is an equalizer and provides that opportunity and access to all. As we think about development that happens in communities, and it's particularly development that involves federal investment in land that is now going to be part of a transit-oriented development or a joint development project, the emphasis on the Relocation Act, working closely with the community, the outreach that transit agencies have to document for these changes, and also what type of mitigations are going to be included in the project. Those are all part of the NEPA process, but in addition to that, it's part of about building that partnership with the community where this new investment is going to take place. As it relates to the small and disadvantaged businesses, we have our small and disadvantaged business programs following the regulations that are in place. We'll be updating those because we want to see more small and disadvantaged businesses be part of the great investment that the bipartisan infrastructure law is bringing to transit agencies across the nation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Sinema from Arizona is recognized from her office.
Thank you, Chairman Brown, and thank you to Administrator Fernandez for joining us today. The bipartisan infrastructure law represents a historic investment in our national transportation infrastructure needs that will update and modernize our highways, bridges, airports, railroads, and public transit systems. The law invested $176 million in public transit in Arizona just for 2022, with nearly $100 million going to the Phoenix Mesa metro area and $23 million for the Tucson metro area. The Federal Transit Administration has a crucial role to play in dispersing these funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law to make sure the money is distributed equitably and consistent with the provisions of the law. I look forward to working with you and with my colleagues on this committee to continue to advance implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law to help Arizona families and small businesses get ahead. Administrator Fernandez, thank you for your public service and transportation. And I thank the FTA for the full funding grant agreement awarded to Phoenix Valley's Metro system for the Northwest Extension Light Rail project earlier this year. This extension of the Metro Light Rail will expand the light rail system across Interstate 17 and encourage redevelopment at the Metro Center site. Looking forward, I'm interested in hearing more about the rollout of the low and no emissions bus program, particularly in challenging climates such as the Phoenix metro area. Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix have prioritized fleet transition planning, the purchase of zero-emission buses, and construction of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And I hope the FTA will again partner with Valley Metro on this project. Now, what advice would you offer to Valley Metro as it pursues transitioning its bus fleet to electric power?
Senator, good day. And yes, the Valley Metro has really done some terrific things in transforming the corridors that they are providing service in. As it relates to the transition to low and no emission vehicles, one of the first things that our regional offices, working very closely with all of our grant recipients, have been doing is reminding them that in applying for the zero emission, that they're required to have a transition plan. And we've provided a template for how that transition plan can be developed. We're not prescriptive, but we certainly want to provide a roadmap for the development of that plan. And in the law, there was very specific 6 points that had to be addressed, 6 areas that had to be addressed. So as my recommendation is that if they are in the process of developing a transition plan, our regional office is available to provide technical assistance. If they have a transition plan and tie that transition plan to their capital program so that it connects with the notice of funding opportunities that we would be putting out every year, and they can build upon that replacement and achieve their goals of bringing cleaner vehicles to their community.
Well, thank you. On May 20th of this year, the Tempe streetcar opened to the public. The streetcar received federal grants, regional funding, and support from a public-private partnership involving the City of Tempe, Arizona State University, and local property owners. The Tempe streetcar supplements the existing Valley Metro Light Rail to better enable local residents and ASU students to navigate and reach destinations in downtown Tempe. A combination of local businesses, office complexes, city parks, art facilities, and sports venues are served by the light rail and streetcar. How can the Tempe streetcar serve as a model for other cities looking to make their communities more adaptable for residents desiring to work, live, and play in one location? And how can the Federal Transit Administration assist communities in these efforts?
Senator, the example of the Tempe streetcar is a great one because each community needs to identify the type of mobility, the type of public transportation system that best serves them. In some communities, it will be the bus, in others, it will be a trolley, in others, it will be an on-demand service. So this is a model of really listening to the community, working with the community, and identifying what the best solution for mobility that can be brought to that community. So thanks for elevating the Tempe trolley.
Well, thank you. You know, the bipartisan infrastructure law increased our federal public transit investment in communities of all sizes. And I'm particularly proud of a provision I worked on with Senator Moran to increase funding to small transit-intensive cities. These are cities in Arizona like Flagstaff, Yuma, 100,000 residents, but high-performing transit systems. For example, the Mountain Line in Flagstaff provided over 1.1 million rides last year across its 10 bus routes. Meanwhile, Yuma's bus system took nearly 254,000 trips in the fourth quarter of 2021 alone. Can you describe the importance of public transit investment in these types of smaller and transit-intensive cities?
Thank you for that question, Senator Sinema. Public transportation really serves all communities, but the smaller communities and cities that are separated by great distances, there is an absolute need for public transportation. We know that the services are not as frequent as in urbanized areas, and therefore having sufficient access to whether it's on demand, paratransit services for individuals with disabilities, on-demand services for seniors who have decided to age in place, or veterans that need access to the VA clinic, or the community as a whole, is crucial. In so many of these communities, public transportation, especially in rural areas, is a lifeline. And just like we may own a vehicle and know that it's there, even if we don't use it every day, knowing that there's a public transportation system that is a phone call away or an app request away is really a comfort to many, many people in this nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Senator Warner from Virginia is recognized from his office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate and glad you're having this very important hearing. Administrator Fernandez, first of all, let me say how happy I am that we got an FTA administrator who is actually worked back in the 90s for WMATA. As you know, our system here serves the whole national capital region. Virtually every member on this committee has staff members that ride WMATA, hopefully on almost a daily basis. But as you're also aware, obviously coming out of COVID, WMATA, like almost all transit systems around the country, are having some challenges on again, getting ridership levels back up. Can you kind of on a, first of all, generalized basis, then I'm going to ask a follow-up question on the Silver Line to Dulles, but on a generalized basis, can you talk about FTA's working relationship with WMATA and what FTA is doing to, again, take a major system like WMATA and help it get back to pre-COVID ridership and other levels?
Yes, Senator, thank you very much for that question. So, of course, because the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority is here in the nation's capital, and this is where we are located as well, we see and live the WMATA service experience. I use Metro all the time, and therefore I can tell you that the ridership on the Metro system is continuing to grow to some points that we have to sometimes wait for another train. But nonetheless, our relationship, the Federal Transit Administration's relationship with WMATA is a very good one. We have a responsibility for providing safety oversight through the Washington Metropolitan Safety Commission of the operations of the Metro, and also working with WMATA and all transit agencies across the country to assist them with transit renewal and assist them with ideas, exchanges of information, and collaboration on how they can not only build back ridership, but also on the safety challenges that they have experienced through peer-to-peer review and collaboration. The leadership changes that have occurred recently with the former general manager retiring and the incoming general manager that's going to be joining on July 25th, Randy Clark from Austin, Texas. I think this it's a great opportunity for WMATA to continue focusing on all the things that matter, and that is safety, ridership, and delivering the highest quality service to the people who live here, who work here, and those who visit.
Well, Administrator, I appreciate that response. I do want to zero in on these last 2 minutes, though, on as you're aware, finishing Metro out to Dulles has been a long and involved process, and we finally had the handover from the Airports Authority, which did the construction, back over to Metro. Obviously, FTA has a role on the safety assessment. My hope is, since we've made that transference, and obviously we've got to make sure phase 2 is safe, but that we do that safety assessment in as timely a manner as possible. We've got to make sure that we get that phase 2 open. We got to make sure it's open in a safe way. And can you, and we've been working closely with the Safety Commission, but can you give us a little bit of a sense? Do you feel like, with the new general manager coming in, I think we've got a timeline of later in the year to get this open to the public. Do you have any concerns about us meeting those timelines?
Senator, from the information that I have received through our regional office in Philadelphia that oversees WMATA. The project is proceeding. It is in commissioning. That means that they're doing testing, and that's one of the reasons that now it's in the WMATA's hands to ensure that all of the systems that have been installed are going to operate safely. The decision then, once that testing is completed, would be the Federal Transit Administration will be signing off on the next step, which would be the identification or determination of a revenue service operations date. And we would do so once we're fully satisfied that it is safe to operate.
And all I'm asking, Administrator, is one, I look forward to working with you on this. Two, if there are concerns, I hope that we hear sooner rather than later. What we don't want to do is go through this whole process and at the 11th hour, here there's a concern that's not been addressed. So I look forward to working with you, and again, appreciate your prior experience working with Metro. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warner. Senator Warren of Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to discuss the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, or the MBTA, which has been plagued with maintenance issues, shutdowns, and significant safety concerns after multiple deaths last year alone. In a letter to the MBTA on April 14th, the Federal Transit Administration, the agency that you run, Administrator Fernandez, expressed extreme concern for rider safety. The letter also stated that the FTA was going to, quote, assume an increased safety oversight role of the MBTA system, close quote, and conduct inspections and obtain data to provide the MBTA with a, quote, roadmap to building a robust safety culture. I share the FTA's concerns. After the FTA issued special safety directives, however, the MBTA reacted by reducing service frequency on many lines. And these service cuts and long delays have negatively impacted all riders, many of whom rely on public transportation to try to get to work or to school. So I have two intertwined questions. The first is, how do we get to a point where people are literally dying on the T? And second, when will the FTA have a detailed roadmap to get the T back on track?
Senator Warren, thank you so much for highlighting the importance of safety in public transportation, and particularly in the rail system. We, as you noted, the letter that was issued by our Chief Safety Officer at the Federal Transit Administration was a result of a series of events that had occurred subsequent to a study of 2019 that identified a series of issues that needed to be addressed that the transit agency was in line to address. And when we experienced ongoing safety incidents that could have been averted, that's the reason that we sent that letter.
And I'm glad you did. I'm sorry. Let me just, you talk about a series of issues. How is it? The question I have is, how do we get to this place where people die on the T? What went wrong?
That is the question. The situation here is safety is our number one priority. And when we see that safety, that the focus on safety, whether it's culture, whether it's decision-making or lack thereof, contributes to incidents that result in death, that's when we raise the flag, and we go beyond just raising the flag, where we step in. And we immediately sent personnel so that we could conduct a safety management inspection. And it was throughout the inspection that we identified additional issues, and that's the reason that we issued a safety directive.
So, and when do you expect to have a report so we can get the T back on track, literally?
Well, we are going to be issuing a report in August to the safety management inspection findings. The Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority needs to continue, one, with the training. They need to hire personnel, and that's one of the reasons, to your second question, that has to do with the impact on ridership, with the impact on service. And that impact on service only occurs when projects and maintenance have not been completed in a timely manner that now need to be performed during revenue service.
I appreciate that. You know, I think what you're saying is the MBTA wasn't paying enough attention to the maintenance and inspections to keep the system safe. I look forward to the report in August. I'm going to hold you to that. But prioritizing safety and service should not be either or. It should be both and. I have one other thing I want to ask about, and that is investment in electrification. I think it's a big part of the answer when it comes to making the MBTA both safer and more modern. Electrification would improve service, would reduce long-term maintenance costs, would help us meet our climate goals, and would solve issues across housing, affordability, traffic, congestion, efficiency, and at the same time, help create new jobs and promote regional economic prosperity and environmental justice. But under the Baker administration, the MBTA is not prioritizing electrification. Administrator Fernandez, while electrification would cost more in upfront capital costs, would this be a way to make the T safer, more reliable, greener, create jobs, and reduce costs in the long run?
Senator Warren, it will achieve all of the above. As a matter of fact, we did issue a grant to MBTA for the replacement of a bus facility. It's going to be a combination. I believe there's a TIFIA loan involved to ensure that they have an adequate facility that can start to accommodate electric vehicles.
Yeah. You know, electrifying commuter rail would mean a faster, more reliable ride and a cleaner environment. And it is mystifying that the T has no tangible plans to get us there. Transitioning to an electric system would be costly, but right now the Commonwealth has a large budget surplus and is set to receive record amounts of federal funding from the infrastructure bill. Rather than continuing to pour money into dirty, unreliable technologies from the last century, we can replace broken down trains with electric ones and invest more in electric buses. I know it's not going to be easy, but we have to use every tool in the toolbox to avert these disasters and give Massachusetts residents the first-class infrastructure they deserve. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Reid of Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Administrator. Thank you for your leadership in the department. Fuel costs are on everybody's mind. In Rhode Island, RIPTR, Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, which is a statewide transit system, was fortunate. They didn't negotiate a contract for gasoline and diesel or whatever at $2 per gallon, but that contract expires. So they're now being thrown into a market where the price is 3 or 4 times as much. The situation is such that your agency does not allow moving money from capital into gas subsidies, if you will, for want of a better term. The House has introduced in their appropriations bill language that would provide that flexibility to agree. Would FTA be sympathetic to allowing, at least for a short period of time, the ability to move money from some of these funds, like the capital fund, into gasoline?
Senator Reid, with the emergency relief funds, one of the things that was made available to all transit agencies, and in particular those who had to use their formula dollars specifically for capital and capital maintenance, but not for operations, was the ability to have access to operating dollars. Many, although the majority of the relief funds have been already obligated, many transit agencies continue to rely on those dollars for operations. Should Congress adopt a provision that allows for the use of capital funds towards operation, we would follow through with the law.
Thank you very much, Madam Administrator. Everyone, Senator Warren just finished discussing the promise of electric vehicles, electric buses, et cetera. We are trying, with the help of your agency, to create, we hope, a completely electric system. We're scheduled to go totally electric on Aquidneck Island, where Newport, Middletown, and
Portsmouth are located, the communities. But one of the problems we've discovered is that these electric vehicles don't have the range of the typical diesel, so you need more of them. But yet FTA has a limit on the number of spare buses, the so-called spare ratio. And again, I'm wondering if you could discuss any flexibility that FTA might offer agencies that are working to expand their electric fleet and need more spares than is authorized currently.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Reed, for that question, because with the transition to electric vehicles, we've been receiving a lot of queries from transit agencies, and it's a priority to have transit vehicles be replaced when their useful life has expired, and we're looking for that transition to move towards a cleaner emission. We have a number of flexibilities built in to our existing spare ratio policy, and we encourage all transit agencies that are looking for flexibilities to work with the regional offices so we can guide them through that process. In fact, this past December, I issued a Dear Colleague letter detailing those very specific flexibilities, in particularly as they relate to a transition to zero emission. Moreover, a specific example is agencies that are introducing zero-emission vehicles into their fleet are able to keep their existing vehicles that are past useful life, and those will not count towards their spare ratio.
Thank you. But again, I think incentivizing electrification is essential to getting it on the roads faster and with all the benefits, of course. And we would not have, I would not have asked the first question if we were all electric. We would still be paying around $2 or less for power per gallon. Workforce development is absolutely critical every place. I just came from a hearing of the Appropriations Committee and Defense Committee, and defense industries are looking for workers. Everyone's looking for workers. And again, RIPTA is putting in a grant for a new bus and bus facilities program to update its maintenance garage, but also include within that training of maintenance personnel in cooperation with the New England Institute of Technology, which is a not-for-profit tech school with an excellent reputation. In fact, they've done a lot of work with the electric boat. So I would just ask you to look favorably on this application. It's very worthwhile. Thank you, Madam Administrator.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Ossoff from Georgia is recognized from his office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Fernandez, for joining us today. Thank you for your service. I want to begin by drawing your attention to the recent earthquake that impacted Savannah, Georgia, and Chatham County, Georgia, and did significant damage to the Chatham Area Transit ferry system. Will you please commit to working with my office to identify, if possible, FTA resources that could be brought to bear to help Chatham County to repair that damage?
Yes, good day, Senator. Yes, our office, our regional office in Atlanta has been in contact with Chatham Transit and working to provide them with technical assistance.
Thank you. And just for clarity, Madam Administrator, will you please commit that you and/or your team will continue to work with my office to try to identify all potential solutions FTA can offer to help Chatham County recover from this natural disaster?
Yes, Senator, we will.
Thank you, Madam Administrator. I'd like to, along the same lines, ask for your commitment to work with my office more broadly to identify possible legislative improvements or administrative improvements that could be made to the emergency response funding program that FTA administers to make it more flexible and to give you and your team more authority and potentially more resources to help transit systems that are impacted by natural disasters and emergencies. Will you engage your team with mine to identify possible improvements to that program?
Senator, we're happy to work and provide technical assistance with emergency relief or any other programs that you all are interested in pursuing flexibilities.
Thank you so much, Madam Administrator. I want to raise a few Georgia-specific transit initiatives with you. The bipartisan infrastructure law obviously provides a historic opportunity for improvements, upgrades, and expansion of critical transportation and transit infrastructure in the state of Georgia. For example, in Metro Atlanta, bus rapid transit along State Route 400 that has broad bipartisan local support, and a new transit line along Campbellton Road, 6 miles between the Oakland City Station and Greenbrier Mall. That's a long-awaited critical piece of infrastructure for Southwest Atlanta. Understanding these are competitive grant programs, will you please commit to work with me and local stakeholders to maximize the prospects for these projects and help us do everything that we can as Georgia leaders to maximize the chances of success?
Senator, yes, the Federal Transit Administration Headquarters Office, in addition to the regional office, is available to provide technical assistance and guidance to transit agencies as they're putting together the applications to ensure that the requirements in the applications, if there are any questions, that we can assist them to better understand what it is that the goal of the grant, the intended program is. So yes, a response to your question is yes, we'll continue providing that technical assistance and guidance.
Good. Looking forward to working with you to maximize the chances of success for those transit lines along Georgia 400 and Campbellton Road. I'd like to ask you more broadly as well, if you will please dedicate a member of your team to meet with a member of my staff, a representative from the FRA, and folks in Metro Atlanta who are interested in expanding commuter rail service for a planning session to discuss how commuter rail service might be brought online to serve Metro Atlanta and the role that the FTA would play, perhaps working with local transit authorities and the FRA in helping make that real. Will you please designate a staff member and engage with my office in some planning work along those lines?
Yes, Senator, our regional office and particularly the regional administrator of the FTA, together with her counterpart at FRA, that is exactly the type of assistance that they provide, and they will be available to support and participate in meetings that you and your team will call regarding these projects.
Thank you so much. No or low emission buses present an opportunity for communities like Chatham County and Chatham Area Transit or institutions like Georgia State University to upgrade their bus fleets to electric and no emission buses. Both of those organizations, institutions are applying for federal funding to do that. Will you please provide to my office an update working with your regional office on the progress of those grant applications and work with me to try to see them through to success?
Yes, Senator, our Office of Congressional Affairs will provide that information to your office.
Thank you so much, Madam Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Warnock from Georgia is recognized. Welcome.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. And folks in Georgia are very much focused on public transit. And like Senator Ossoff, it's certainly a concern of mine and a high priority. Every day, thousands of Georgians rely on public transportation, from Atlanta commuters taking MARTA to work, to our veterans and our seniors who are living in rural Georgia using one of our 80 rural transit services to get to their doctor's appointments, 80 rural transit services. I think that's an important point because often when you talk about public transit, as you know, people assume urban, but the rural communities very much rely on transit services in some ways more. Safely and efficiently getting Georgians where they need to go is a priority of mine. And that is why I fought to include provisions from my Capital Investments Grant Improvement Act and increase funding for the CIG program in the bipartisan infrastructure law. The provision I wrote to lift the small starts project size cap is already enabling MARTA, Georgia's largest public transportation service, to develop and improve its transportation infrastructure to benefit millions of passengers. Administrator Fernandez, how will lifting the project size cap for small starts create jobs, allow more communities to benefit from the CIG program, and expand public transportation service?
Senator, the Small Starts program is a very important program, part of our capital investment grant. And I can say to you that there is a pipeline right now in our CIG of over 60 projects. 50% of those are small starts. So we're seeing more and more bus rapid transit projects coming to the fold. And the pipeline itself is, as I noted earlier, 150% greater than anything we've ever had vying for funds. By lifting that cap, what it would do is give transit agencies the opportunity to better bring their resources, their local resources, and be able to maybe even accelerate some of the projects that they have in their portfolio. And if it's a single project that they're pursuing in a community, or maybe their first ever Small Starts project, it gives them the opportunity to introduce that project sooner and to be able to bring that high-quality service to the community and the corridors that it will serve.
Yeah. As I often say, if people can't get to where they're going, they can't get to where they're going. Or said more positively, we need to help people to get to where they need to go through being able to move physically. So I look forward to working with the FTA to ensure that the bipartisan infrastructure law continues to expand access to public transportation in Georgia, in our rural and in our urban communities. During the height of the pandemic, rural transit systems played a critical role in preserving public health and filling the gaps, whether it was meal delivery or rides to vaccination sites. So I'm not surprised that when I travel across Georgia, I was down in Valdosta a couple weeks ago, Waycross before that, Columbus, I hear and see demand for small urban and rural transit services to connect Georgians to healthcare services, to education, jobs, grocery stores, and so much more. Last year, I introduced the HOPE Act to help rural and disadvantaged communities identify and address their transportation needs. I'm glad that this year's government funding bill provided $20 million for the HOPE Act, now known as the Areas of Persistent Poverty Program, which will unlock funding for rural transit projects in communities like Chatham County, Savannah, Georgia, Valdosta, and will improve access to jobs. Administrator Fernandez, what has FTA learned in its early implementation of the Areas of Persistent Poverty program as it works to make public transportation services more accessible?
Senator, it's a very important program, and what we're learning is that there are communities where the access to a minivan that can get an individual who recently had surgery and needs to go for physical therapy and can no longer drive or cannot drive throughout that period, it is their connection to health improvement. It is their ability to recover. I was recently in Jackson, Mississippi, and had the opportunity to talk to a woman who had experienced just that, where she thought that public transportation was for other people, and she realized that that other person was her. And recognizing that she lived on a street that did not have a name or an address, but the paratransit vehicle was still able to reach to her location and get her to where she needed to go. So we recognize and have always been very cognizant of the significance of having good public transportation in rural areas. And that's one of the reasons that through our Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility, bringing together all of the resources in government that are available to, whether it's human services and some of the other cabinet departments and agencies, to encourage leveraging those dollars so that service transportation, non-emergency transportation is available to individuals no matter where they live.
I'm out of time, but you talk about the importance of this in the ordinary, everyday lives of Georgians. Congress, as you know, funded the Areas of Persistent Poverty program in appropriations this year, but has not permanently authorized the program for future years. From where you sit, can you talk about the importance of ongoing funding of these programs for rural and low-income communities?
Yeah, these programs are very important. We know that these areas are designated when there's 20% of poverty in the county, and that's how it's designated, and recognize that many of these locations are distant from urban centers, they're distant from trauma centers and other critical needs and access points. So clearly, having human service transportation together with rural operators working collaboratively to ensure that there's always access to individuals, whether it's for routine or whether it's for medical services, that public transportation can be there when it's needed.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. I would only add that both Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock have spoken to me many times about the importance of public transit in Georgia, something that's been frankly ignored for far too many years, and the investment that they have demanded is really beginning to pay off. And as chair of the committee with that jurisdiction, I know my interest, and I know that you have that same interest, Administrator Fernandez. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland is recognized from his office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Fernandez, thank you for all your good work. I want to start by associating myself with the comments made by Senator Warner with respect to the Washington metro system, WMATA, which, as you said, is important to the entire region, and the federal government has an important stake in the success of WMATA. We have some ongoing safety issues. Our larger long-term challenge is bringing back ridership that was lost during COVID. We've recovered much of that, but have a ways to go. So look forward to your input and ideas on that front. We also have a lot of other important Maryland transit projects that have been made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure bill, including the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Project. And I don't want to go into all the details, but I just would ask you for a commitment that your office work with us to identify the maximum possibilities to move that project forward.
Yes, Senator. FDA is working with Charles County to advance the Southern Maryland Transit Corridor Project. And they are not a direct recipient yet, but the regional office has been working very closely with them to ensure that they comply with all the legal requirements.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being on top of this issue. I appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and your team. Of course, the infrastructure is an essential component, but the other essential piece that makes everything run are the workers, the transit workers. And I was very pleased that a piece of legislation that I introduced to strengthen the safety of transit workers along with passengers was passed and included as part of the infrastructure bill. And you mentioned in your testimony that transit authorities located in large urban areas must establish their safety committees comprised of both management and labor officials by the end of this month, and that all transit agencies must complete their safety plans by the end of the year. My question is, as you monitor these deadlines, are you confident that we'll be on track in terms of getting those safety committees up and running?
My expectation is that all transit agencies are on track to get that up and running, Senator. When the legislation, when the bipartisan infrastructure law was enacted in November of last year, it was effective immediately. And the transit agencies all understood, based on additional information that was put out by my office, what was required of them. And those that had existing safety committees, they made sure that there was equal representation. Those that had to create those safety committees have had ample time to do so. I think that the additional timing that has been allowed through July 31st from the November 15th enactment is adequate for them to make the changes, the requisite changes that are necessary in order to update their public safety transportation agency safety plans by the end of this year.
Well, thank you. And thank you for holding people's feet to the fire in terms of the deadlines. You know, when I talk to transit workers, you hear often, terrible stories about the kind of abuse that they have to take. And so some of the changes that I expect to be made, I think will go a long ways to addressing some of those issues. And that, of course, raises the larger issue of workforce. As you well know, we're experiencing, workforce demands in many different sectors. I know the transit workforce situation is no different. We did, as part of the infrastructure bill, as you know, include the efforts with respect to investment in workforce. And I know that you're focused on the Transit Workforce Center. Could you just speak briefly about your vision for the program and how the funding is flowing for those purposes?
Yes, and such an excellent question, given where we are with all the demands of an increase funding, both on the construction side through the capital investment grant, and then the investment in rolling stock, upgrading and replacing rail vehicles, in addition to transitioning bus fleets. So the way that we envision this Transit Workforce Center moving forward is to be able to serve transit agencies, provide them with some very specific guidelines, provide them with training modules, and also help them make connections at the local level with community colleges so that they can create the opportunities for not only recruiting, but also training and upskilling the existing workforce to work on the new vehicles, to work on the new technology that is out there. We, like all other industries, are in competition for talent and for individuals who want to become, whether it's a bus operator, rail conductor, or a maintenance frontline worker, and therefore looking at beyond just the industry and connecting with high schools. And that's one of the other areas that they're going to be, the Transit Workforce Center will assist with, is connecting with local schools in addition to labor shops so that the apprenticeship programs can be developed, and those that are already existing can be open and made available so that that pipeline can continue to grow. And we do see attrition in the industry, and we want to make sure that there's sufficient pipeline to backfill that attrition.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Toomey has one last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Madam Administrator. As you know, last year's infrastructure law requires the Secretary of Transportation to establish a program focused on the deployment of advanced digital construction management systems under the FTA's innovation program. Increasing and expanding the use of innovative technologies for construction can help expedite timelines and save federal taxpayers money. These types of technologies are also applied throughout the life cycle of transportation infrastructure, including the maintenance phase. During this committee's last transit hearing in February, the Central Ohio Transit Authority testified that they use advanced technology systems to help with predictive maintenance for state of good repair improvements. So, Administrator Fernandez, could you briefly provide an update on the timing for establishing this program?
Yes, Senator Toomey, and I really appreciate that we're having the conversation about the advanced digital construction management. I was trained in the construction industry, and this is without a doubt one of the best opportunities that the transit industry has to not only establish a good program management program, but also the oversight of that program to ensure that with the use of technology, we can predict, we can forecast the schedule, budget, and keep projects on task. The large projects have been using it, as was noted by General Manager Joanna Pinkerton when she testified. The other, what we're seeing now with the increase in funding, the $23 billion in the capital investment grant, that means that we're going to have more transit agencies. Many of them are small operators that may not have familiarity. So this is clearly an opportunity. We are in the process now of collecting information so that we can not only identify what has been used, what some of the entities that have applied advanced technologies, what they have learned, where do we see the gaps, and as I noted, with the increase in small operators now taking on projects, construction projects, that there is certainly an opportunity for them to connect, and what if any additional research can be made available.
Right.
Our intent is to move post-haste with this.
Do you have an estimate for when the program would be established?
We are going to be issuing the information on the research aspect of this, because it came through our research program. We'll be issuing information on that, and my expectation is that will be towards the end of this year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Administrator Fernandez has shown the FDA is working on many fronts to deliver the promised investment and important program updates in the infrastructure laws. Thank you, Administrator, for your testimony today. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, these questions are due 1 week from today. And on Tuesday, July 19th. So the witnesses, please submit your responses to the questions for the record 45 days from the day you received them. With that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.